Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to break down Madhurav Rasapre's landmark 1901 story, Tokri Bhar Mitti, which translates to a basket full of soil. Now, if you're currently tackling the Class 8 Hindi curriculum, or, if you just love a really powerful, timeless story about humanity triumphing over sheer arrogance, you are in the exact right place. We're exploring a piece that's not just another textbook chapter. It's actually widely recognized as the very first Hindi short story ever written. We'll unpack the narrative, the characters, the core themes, and of course the essential vocabulary you need to absolutely master this material. Here's our agenda for today. 1. Introduction to the story and author. 2. Story summary. 3. Main characters. 4. Core theme and message. And 5. Important vocabulary and idioms. Section 1. Introduction to the story and author. Madhurav Sapre was a literal pioneer of Hindi literature and journalism at the turn of the 20th century. Born in 1871 in Madhya Pradesh, he was way more than just a writer. He was a social reformer and a dedicated patriot deeply involved in the Indian independence movement. In fact, he founded the magazine Chhattisgarh Mitra in 1900, laying the groundwork for Hindi journalism in that entire region. Just a year later, in 1901, Ek Tokri Bhar Mitti was published in a magazine called Saraswati. He constantly used his pen to highlight the suffering of the poor under feudal and foreign rule. And honestly, you'll see that perfectly reflected in the story we're about to jump into. Section 2, Story Summary. So let's get into the narrative. Picture this. We open with an incredibly wealthy, arrogant zamindar, a landlord, who decides he wants to expand the courtyard of his massive palace. The only problem? There's a poor, orphaned old widow living in a tiny hut right next door. The zamindar tells her to leave, but she completely refuses. Her husband, her only son, and her daughter-in-law all passed away in that exact hut. It holds her entire life's memories, and she's living there now with her 5-year-old orphaned granddaughter. When she says no, the zamindar just uses his vast wealth to bribe some lawyers, ruthlessly exploiting the legal system to force her out. The widow is entirely shattered. But worse than that, her young granddaughter goes into deep shock. Missing the only home she has ever known, the little girl stops eating altogether. And here is where we hit the emotional turning point. The desperate widow returns to the landlord, but with a highly unexpected, humbling request. She's not there to fight for her land. She approaches the zamindar, who is casually strolling around his newly acquired property, and begs him for just one single basket of soil from her old hut. Her plan is just beautifully tragic. She wants to use that familiar soil to build a small stove, hoping that food cooked on the soil of their old home will finally convince her starving granddaughter to eat. The zamindar, who is mostly just annoyed, dismissively grants her this tiny favor. The widow fills her basket, but she's just too frail to lift it onto her head. She pleads with the zamindar to help her. Feeling a brief flicker of pity, he steps forward. He grabs the basket, applies his strength, and tries to lift it. But he can't. He tries harder, using all his might, but the basket of soil literally doesn't move an inch. Ashamed, he admits he can't lift it. And right here, the widow delivers this profound realization that completely shatters his arrogance. She looks right at him and says, "Maharaj, do not be angry. If you cannot lift one basket of soil, how will you bear the burden of this entire hut, containing thousands of baskets of soil for your entire lifetime?" It is a massive moral blow. The zamindar, who had been completely blinded by his wealth, suddenly has his eyes opened. He repents, begs her for forgiveness, and immediately gives her back the hut. Section 3. Main characters. The dynamic between these two characters is fascinating because it totally flips the script on power. On paper, the zamindar has everything: money, legal power, status. But internally, he's weak, greedy, and morally bankrupt. Though we have to give him credit for being a dynamic character who actually realizes his catastrophic mistake and changes. On the flip side, we have the vridha, the old widow. Society writes her off as helpless. Yet she is the undeniable emotional anchor of the story. Her moral strength, her wisdom, and her absolute devotion to her granddaughter prove to be infinitely stronger than the zamindar's bank account. Section 4. Core theme and message. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, the ultimate triumph belongs to humanity and humility, not the pride of wealth. The core message is straightforward. Wealth and power should never make a person arrogant. A poor old woman's simple wisdom managed to help a wealthy landlord realize a massive mistake, transforming him into someone kind and just. It also touches on what a home truly is. To the zamindar, the hut was just real estate. To the widow, it was her entire emotional universe. Sapre is reminding us that true empathy means recognizing the deeply held attachments and the pain of others. Section 5. Importance vocabulary and idioms. Let's lock down the essential Hindi vocabulary you need for your exams. The Zimindar is our landlord who wants to expand his ahata, or enclosed courtyard. To do it, he targets the jopti, the hut, of the vridha, the old woman. Pay attention to the emotional weight of words like iklauta, meaning the sole or only one, referring to the widow's lost son, and anath, meaning orphan, which describes both her and her little kanya, her granddaughter. If you link these words directly to the plot points, they become incredibly easy to remember. Moving on to the action and emotion words, these basically map out the landlord's entire character arc. At first, the Zamindar's prayatna, his effort to get the hut legally, is nishpal, unsuccessful. So he decides to kabza kartna, to forcefully take possession. When the widow comes back, she has to gidgidama, to plead with him for the soil. But the major shift happens at the end, when the garvit, arrogant landlord, suddenly becomes ludshit, deeply ashamed. This leads to his paschatap, regret, and his ultimate plea for kshama, forgiveness. You see, the vocabulary practically tells the story for you. And finally, we have 4 vital idioms, or muhavire, which are absolute gold for your exams. First, bal kikal nikalna means to split hairs or find faults unnecessarily. That's exactly how the Zamindar's lawyers twisted the law. Second, teli garam karna translates to warming the pouch, but it means to give a bribe, which is how he paid off those lawyers. Third, dan mad me chur hona perfectly describes the Zamindar at the start, blinded by the pride of wealth. And the resolution? Ankain koljana, when his eyes are finally open to the profound truth. To wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about how this century-old lesson actually applies to us right now. Madhavras Sapre wasn't just writing about a landlord and a widow in 1901. He was making a larger point about human nature. We all have moments where we get a bit blinded by our own goals, maybe ignoring the feelings of the people around us. How can a simple shift in empathy completely change your worldview? Keep that in mind as you study this chapter. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this deep dive helps you absolutely crush your understanding of Tokri Bhar Mitti.